Good morning. Yesterday afternoon, I received a letter from Michael Marchbank, Christy Clark's appointed head of the BC Public School Employers Association. In that letter, the BC Liberals and the employer attempt to make good on their threat to roll back teachers' wages during our job action. Now that teachers are starting rotating strikes on Monday, they want to claw back 10% of our wages on days that teachers are in the classroom working as hard as they can with our students to meet their needs, despite the conditions that our students and our teachers have been faced with all the cuts in the last 12 years. We've already referred this matter to the Labor Relations Board, and it's more of the same behavior from a premier and a government that the BC Supreme Court ruled had bargained in bad faith with us, and they had put their own political agenda interests before students and families. But this time, Christy Clark has even gone further. The Premier, who once promised to put families first, and who just yesterday said that children should not be put in the middle, is launching significant disruptions to our education system. The BC Liberals are now implementing a series of lockouts that will have wide-ranging impact on students, teachers, and parents. In addition to threatened wage rollbacks, Christy Clark has authorized the lockout of all secondary teachers on June 25th, 26th, and 27th. That will shut down schools completely and put the marking of province-wide exams for senior grades as well as report cards at risk. On June 24th, all grade 10 English students and Social Studies 11 students are writing their provincial exams. Christy Clark's lockout starts the next day, and that will prevent thousands of students' exams from being marked. Christy Clark's lockout could put those final report cards and marks for grade 10 and 11 students at risk. Surprisingly, it gets worse. The move will lock teachers out of all of our work sites, including schools, 45 minutes before and after school. That means no more extracurricular activities. In adopting this strategy, Christy Clark could be the cause of many canceled field trips, sports tournaments, theater productions, music concerts, and many other events that BC kids were looking forward to. During our Stage 1 job action, teachers were very careful to ensure that already scheduled extracurricular and voluntary activities continued. We wanted to minimize the impact on our students. During rotating strikes, teachers would be free to continue all voluntary activities for 4 out of the 5 days. Not anymore. By locking teachers out before and after school, student activities by the hundreds will be canceled by this government. Christy Clark's lockout will also impact graduation ceremonies. During our rotating strikes, we had asked our locals to work with districts to protect graduation ceremonies. But now schools will be behind a lockout 5 days a week, and teachers at schools scheduled to host ceremonies will be forced out. We've already heard from secondary teachers that they will be locked out on the day that students graduate. In putting grade 12 grad on the chopping block, Christy Clark's definition of families first? The lockout before and after school, and as well as lunch, will also limit teachers' ability to communicate with parents, another area that we had protected in our job action. No more calls to parents, no more emails home. That all comes to an end because of a government-imposed lockout. Finally, this one will hit students and teachers the hardest. By directive, teachers will now be prohibited from interacting with students during the lunch hour. Christy Clark's lockout will mean that teachers would be insubordinate if they helped a struggling child or a child with special needs during the lunch hour. Shameful. For many teachers, this is a valuable time. Lunch is also a time when teachers work with students, when students ask questions about an assignment that they're excited about, or a lesson that they didn't quite get. By locking teachers out at lunch, Christy Clark is stripping students of the valuable one-on-one time that they have with their teachers. This government is so desperate to attack teachers that now they are putting student academics, well-being, and extracurricular activities at risk. It's an unprecedented move by Christy Clark and the BC Liberals. British Columbians should be shocked and disappointed. Parents should contact their local MLA immediately and ask why teachers will no longer be able to help our students at lunch or to mark grade 10, grade 11 exams, or hand out report cards, run sports tournaments, or attend graduation ceremonies. Christy Clark's lockout is going to have a deep impact on our students and on our schools. All it shows is her unwillingness to address the real issues in education: underfunding, cuts to specialist teachers, class size, and class composition. Premier Clark would rather shut down extracurriculars, prevent teachers from working with students at lunch hour, and block teachers from talking to parents about a properly funded education system. It's for the BC Liberal government to own up to their mistakes, their record of bad faith bargaining, and put a fair deal on the table. Smaller classes, more supports for children with special needs, and extra one-on-one time with all kids, and fair wages. That's how we will get a deal, and that's how we can end this crisis in education. Thank you.
If government did compromise on class size and composition, how willing would the teachers be to make their own compromise with the salary?
Well, I've been very clear that bargaining is about compromise, and bargaining is about moving forward and not backwards. Class size is an important issue for us at the bargaining table, and we want to see smaller class sizes for our students come September, and we want to see more access for our students to specialist teachers so they can have that more one-on-one time.
So if they made a move with class size and composition, you guys would be willing to make counter moves?
You know, we need a move from government on class size. That's something they've been unwilling to do so far. And after they were found to again break the Constitution, violate our charter rights for the second time, and put on the table basically language that says, despite the Supreme Court ruling that says the illegal provisions on, or the stripping of the collective agreement that was found to be illegal, instead of giving the school districts the necessary funding to put in place smaller classes for our students and more access to specialist teachers, and we are open to that happening in September. Instead of doing that, what they did is put language on the bargaining table that would actually strip out those provisions that they were legally stripped out in 2002. So we would like to see provisions by government at the bargaining table that address this issue into the collective agreement.
Jim, based on this latest move by the employer, what do you think is the likelihood at this point that any kind of agreement could be reached before the end of this school year to perhaps avoid those lockouts in June?
Well, you know, it is unfortunate and it's disappointing, and it definitely doesn't get us closer to getting that collective agreement that we all want. And I'm hoping that when we get back to the bargaining table this afternoon, that the government comes to that table in good faith and brings some revised proposals that actually get us closer to a deal rather than making us more far apart with their punitive and threatening actions that they've announced yesterday through their letter.
You criticize the government for disrupting classes and disrupting students, but obviously the teachers announced a strike, which is also going to be disrupting classes and disrupting students. So don't both sides bear some responsibility for the impact this dispute is having on students? I mean, it seems like you're putting all the blame on the province, and I'm wondering if the union needs to share some of that as well.
Well, we've been very clear in terms of our staged action. We didn't take the decision to take a strike vote lightly. We were hoping that the strike vote would put the necessary pressure on government to come to the table in good faith and bring the necessary funding so we can get a deal that we consider fair for teachers and includes better supports for our students. Then we moved to a low-level action. And that low-level action was very purposeful because we remain in our classrooms, working with our students, meeting with parents, communicating with parents, doing report cards, doing our voluntary activities that were prearranged. And so we purposely have set our action in various stages to minimize the impact on our students. And that's what we've been trying to do. And that's why it was a low-level action. And we were hoping that that low-level action would be enough for government to want to deal with us. And we didn't see that at the bargaining table. So, and again, so we moved to stage 2. And again, in our stage 2 action, we want to minimize the disruption to our students, and that's why we went on a 1-day rotating strike per week. Because what that means is that all schools across this province would be open for 4 out of the 5 days. And we're hoping that the pressure is on government, the pressure is province-wide, and that the disruption for our students is minimal as possible, because what we're talking about is 1 day a week. And then we're in our classrooms working 4 days a week as hard as we can to meet the needs of our students. And now we have government saying, we don't want you doing that.
Are you not considering escalating or moving to a full strike or anything like that? I mean, changing course or changing tactics?
What we said when we announced that we were moving to stage 2 is that we would take this week by week depending on progress at the bargaining table. So for us, we want a deal. It's not about moving to another stage. It's about getting a fair deal for teachers, better supports for students, and we want that deal in place before the end of June, and we want to see smaller class sizes for our students, more one-on-one time, which is so important for students and for teachers, so they have that time to interact with our students in terms of helping them with the work that they do or help with a particular subject. But it's also about being able to talk to a student, whether it's a 6-year-old student, a 15-year-old student. It's just about how their day is going. And you can't minimize that one-on-one attention. Students love it, teachers love it.
If things stand the way they are right now, what's going to happen to summer school?
Sorry, can you repeat your
If
question?
things stand the way they are now, what's going to happen with summer school?
Well, we're hoping that there will be a deal by the end of June, but in terms of the lockout, you know, there probably won't be any preparations for summer school if teachers are locked out.
Is it possible that something happened at the negotiation table this afternoon or tomorrow in the context where you have just received this letter and you announced earlier this week, sorry, rotating strike? So is it worth it to meet this afternoon and tomorrow?
You know, it's always worth it to meet, because when you're at a bargaining table talking, and that's always hopeful. And so for us, it's about getting a deal, a fair deal for teachers, better supports for students. And as long as both sides are there talking, then there is a willingness to come to a deal. And we're hoping that it's sooner rather than later.
And when you talk about the lockout, is it a lockout for those days, or is it a lockout that begins that date as long as it's not settled?
Well, you know, according to the letter from Michael Marchbank and Christy Clark's lockout is 5 days a week. Our rotating strikes are affecting 1 day a week in terms of schools, but their lockout affects every day. So teachers are partially locked out from school every day, including lunchtime and recess.
Should there be a mediator involved in the process?
You know, mediation is one part of the process that's open to us in collective bargaining. We had asked for mediation in the last round of bargaining. And in fact, I had actually met with Debbie Cameron at the Labor Board back in January, February 2012. And government specifically told their chief negotiator that they could not meet with me one-on-one in a mediation. So mediation is an option, but mediation is something that you use when both sides are closer together. And we have a facilitator at the table that we will continue using, because it's good to have a facilitator listening to the positions of both sides at the bargaining table. And at some point, that is an option that's open to both sides, and we'll utilize it when we think it's best to utilize it.
But it doesn't seem that both sides getting any closer though.
Yeah, isn't it time?
Well, that's, I think, what's about moving to rotating strikes, putting additional pressure on government to get that deal. And, you have to go into this despite the threats that are being made against us, and despite the fact that we're working as hard as we can to meet the needs of our students. You have to remain optimistic and hopeful that a deal will be done. And that's where I'm at. I'm thinking positively about this. Our teachers, we want a deal at the bargaining table. But we also know that for any deal to happen, government has to come to the table and bring the necessary funding. That's what they did in 2006, and that's what they haven't done yet.
So without mediation, the process can drag on forever.
Well, I'm hoping that the process doesn't drag on, that the government comes and revises their proposals, and there will be the back and forth that needs to happen at a bargaining table. And we're about compromising.
It's probably a good idea to have both parties lock up in a room until solutions to that. Do you think that's a good idea?
Well, we need government to actually come to the table with the will to negotiate an agreement. And so far, we haven't seen that will on their part. They haven't moved on their positions on class size and class composition and minimum levels for students. They've had the same position they've always had. And they actually really haven't moved significantly at all on the issue of a fair wage offer for us. And those are two important issues that we need to deal with, and some of the other issues. And I'm hoping that we can get there. But government has to be willing to bring the funding to the table.
In terms of the impact, that you can exert any pressure on government with escalating strike actions, right? Because even before you got anything started, we're already seeing threats of financial penalties. We're already seeing threats of a lockout. And if history serves, they can always legislature back to work. So where does that leave?
Yeah, and that's the history of this government: bad faith bargaining, legislating, rather than coming to the table in good faith to get a deal. And that's in the back of our minds. And they seem to be putting more energy into ways to attack us and threaten us than ways to find an agreement. And we're hoping that with the next stage that they will change their ways, come to the table, bargain in good faith, bring the funding to that table, and let's get a deal that's fair for teachers and provides better supports for students, because that is critical, because that's all. It's what we're about as teachers, working in the classroom with our students to meet the needs as best as we can. And this government underfunds to the tune of $1,000 less per student than the Canadian average. Second worst funding across Canada, next to Prince Edward Island. And you can just see what's happening right now, where this government refuses to even cover the costs of inflation for school districts, even refuses to cover the cost of downloaded costs that they create, such as increasing MSP premiums, hydro rates, etc. So it's time to put more funding in. We see what's happening out there in districts and the massive cuts that they're making, which again, what will that mean? It will mean higher class sizes, more higher class sizes, and it will mean less specialist teachers working with students. Coquitlam, getting rid of all teacher librarians. And literacy, reading is so important. Libraries, critical piece.
The employer says that the teachers union refuses to meet or refuses to reconvene the data working group on class size and composition. Why?
We've talked about that, and we've got the working group on data. And even that working group on data previously came up with some numbers that we've agreed on. And government is not even using the numbers that the data table had agreed on in terms of even what the cost of a 1% salary increase. And we continually ask them, so by going back to the data table, will that help us get closer to a collective agreement? And at the last bargaining session, Peter Cameron said, no. By reconvening the data table won't help us get closer. All they want the data table for is to help understand how they're coming up with their figures. It's not about getting a deal. And we'll meet if it's about getting a deal, because that's what we want.
Jim, you talked about the impacts that this will have on students, but did you not anticipate that the government could respond in this way and that this lockout would happen?
Well, you know, in a democracy, and thankfully we still live in a democracy, though this government likes to violate the Constitution of the country in terms of the Charter rights. And part of full free collective bargaining is the right to strike and lockout. And so lockout is something that's open to the employer. And so that was a possibility, we knew, in terms of this round of bargaining. And in terms of our action, we've tried to minimize the impact on our students. And government, in their actions, don't seem to care.
And again, in terms of the impact of students after, after classes are over, will any exams be marked, or be a bit more specific on what will happen to exams because of this?
Well, according to the letter from Michael Marchbank, and we'll be dealing with it at the Labor Relations Board in terms of the 10% wage cut when we're in our classrooms working and teaching with our students. We've been locked out. They're pretty clear that we can't do anything during recess and lunchtime, and that we have to be out of the school 45 minutes after, and we can't be there before 45 minutes. So everything that we do has to happen between that time frame, excluding lunch and recess. So in effect, they're locking us out. In effect, what they're saying is there will be no marking of exams. And if we take this to June 25th, 26th, and 27th, the exams are on the 24th, and the marking would happen after that. There would be no marking because we're locked out by the employer.
But Jim, is there any chance that teachers would try that limited lockout? I mean, if they are involved in, extracurriculars that they want to remain a part of, that they feel strongly about? I mean, is there a chance that they could not follow those instructions?
You know, that's always a possibility, but you know, like I said in my earlier comments, you know, when you're directed by the employer to either do something or not to do something, and then you do it, then you can be threatened with discipline. So you have to take that into account. But yeah, absolutely, some of our teachers, despite being told by government that they can't volunteer something that's already been prearranged, they might. Yeah.
Teachers often take their work home with them, though. Does this prevent that as well?
You know, teachers work long days at school, and teachers take their work home and spend hours in the evenings and on weekends. And you know, looking at the letter and what it's saying, you can interpret it that what government is saying, that teachers, you can't take your work home either.
At what point would you consider a change to the job action strategy? I know you said next week is going ahead as planned with the rotating strikes, nothing's changing there. But now with this presented to you, at what point will you look at changing your plan or escalating your job action?
Well, for us, it's always been based on progress at the bargaining table. You know, the other actions by government in terms of punitive and threats, you know, we take a look at that and we have to deal with it in the means that we have. Like the 10% cut, we'll deal with it through the Labor Relations Board. But for us, it's about getting a deal at the bargaining table that's fair for teachers, better supports for students. That's what's important. And that's what we'll look at in terms of whether we move to another stage or not.
But don't you, from what you're saying, it sounds as though you feel that this is a reflection that no progress is being made, that in fact you feel that things are kind of going backwards.
You know, it feels like they're going backwards, and what we want is just have it move forward. And you have to be hopeful. You have to be hopeful that government wants a deal that's fair, but they have to come to the table with the necessary funding. I'm hoping that government brings some revised proposals so we can actually start working towards that deal.
What would the next stage be?
You know, the next stage will be determined by the executive. We've previously said that to move to another stage, there would be another province-wide vote by our members, and that decision will be made by the executive at some point in time. But we're just moving into stage 2. We haven't even begun stage 2. And, you know, part of the reason I'm moving to stage 2 is to put that pressure and get government back to the bargaining table in good faith and bring the funding to make a deal happen, like in 2006.
What were
Well, one of the numbers was that in our sector, a 1% pay increase costs approximately 20.8 million or 21 million. And now I know they're using a number such as 27 million.
Statistics Canada's figures are showing that BC's teachers seems like having the lower end of the spectrum in terms of salary scales within Canada. Is that one of the reasons why you guys are fighting so hard on wages?
That's one of the issues at the bargaining table for us. You know, we're looking at a portion of the cost of living and keeping up with cost of living, which is important for all working people across British Columbia, and we support that. We've just come off 2 years of legislated zeros. We've been offered basically, in effect, another 2 years of zero in their offer. And part of us is trying to close the gap between our colleagues across Canada. It's something we tried to address at the bargaining table in the last round of bargaining, and government just refused to even discuss it. And yes, we are anywhere between 6th to 9th across Canada when we look at wages compared to our colleagues in Manitoba, Saskatchewan, New Brunswick, Ontario, and Alberta. In the last round of bargaining in Saskatchewan, their government addressed the issue of closing the gap between teachers in Alberta and Manitoba, and it's something that we're hoping that our government will take to heart. And so that's part of a reasonable wage offer that we're hoping for. Yes.
The education minister says that extracurricular activities aren't covered by the letter. It's a teacher's choice, and he says that grad ceremonies can take place with the help of, I think he said, with administration and parents. Who's right? You're saying that those things can't happen. He's saying that those things can and will happen.
Well, you know, what we have to go by is a letter from the appointed administrator, Michael Marchbank, who represents government, who represents Christy Clark, and nothing happens in this bargain without Christy Clark okaying it. And in that, but in the letter, it says we can't be at work 45 minutes before, and we have to be gone 45 minutes after. We're locked out. And so the minister may say that, and maybe they never thought about the ramifications of partially locking out teachers, but that's what their letter says.
Mr. Marchbank's letter also says that the teachers' demands for total compensation is 4 times higher than any other public sector unions. There's a lot of parents who are going to be watching this on TV tonight. What would you say to them as to why you deserve that?
Well, what we're looking for is smaller class sizes for our students, class composition guarantees, and more access to specialist teachers for our students. And we're also looking for a fair wage increase. And we believe that what we put on the table is fair. We're asking for 10.75% over 4 years and a portion of cost of living. And government has not basically moved off their position on what they've offered us over 5 years. And what we're looking for is a deal that's unique, that addresses the issues of K to 12. The same thing that the other unions who are in bargaining or who've agreed, they looked at what was needed in terms of their system.
Just want to clarify just one thing about the pay cuts that they're talking about.
Yes.
I've seen it described a few different ways. You're understanding that it would be 5%, as they say, across the board, but 10 for everyone, going up to 10 if the floating strike goes ahead.
So as of Monday, according to the letter, though, we'll be dealing with that at the Labor Relations Board next week, that they would be doing a basically across the board 10% wage cut for teachers being in their classroom working with students. And they're going to cut our wages by 10%. That's not acceptable. You know, when we're off on the rotating, we'll already be losing the wages for that one day. But when we're working with students and working as hard as we can to meet their needs.
And the deadline for assigning a contract to get an assigning bonus, is that the 27th or the 30th?
I would assume it's the 30th, but you know that the money for the signing bonus should be put in an offer to the salary grid, and that would help us get closer to a deal.
So since Jim has to get to the bargaining table in just a few minutes, can we wrap it up? Is everybody okay?
Just to clarify that the 45 minutes before and after work lockout, when does that start?
According to the letter, it would begin on Monday.
And just one more question about the data working group. Did they come up with any numbers on class size and composition that the teachers liked?
Well, there's all sorts of numbers on class size and class composition. What we heard in the court proceedings that it would, to reinstate the legally stripped out provisions, it would be $300 million or so. I believe Minister Fassbender again made the comment that it would be $300 million to restore our provisions. And the government in that Michael Marchbank letter comes up with a different figure, which seems to be erroneous. What we want at a minimum is smaller class sizes, more access to specialist teachers, the provisions restored in our collective agreement, like the Supreme Court of British Columbia asked this government to do. Thank you.